The man came through my window on my wedding night, and he was good at it. He made no sound on the sill and none on the floor. He had a wire in his hands, and he had already worked out which side of the bed I slept on. What he had not worked out was that I was awake, that I had been awake for hours, and that the body he was standing over used to do his job for money. I took his wrist and turned it against the joint until the wire dropped. Then I put him face down on the rug with my knee between his shoulder blades. There was a letter opener on the nightstand, sitting in a pile of wedding cards nobody had bothered to open. It was dull. It did not need to be sharp. The bedroom door opened. Desmond stood in the frame in his shirt sleeves, the man half this city paid tribute to, and he looked at his brand new Omega husband kneeling on an assassin's spine. Then the man under my knee turned his head against the rug and said, "You're supposed to be dead. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now, back to the story. I need to go back a little, because that sentence had two answers, and neither one of them was simple. My name was Vance. I had killed people for money since I was 17 years old, which was 2 years after a voice on a telephone paid a state home in Kansas City to lose my file. I never saw the man the voice belonged to. That was the arrangement, and I never questioned it, because I was 15 and hungry, and he was the first person who had ever bothered to want something from me. He called 4 or 5 times a year. He gave me a city, a window of days, and a folder in a locker. He never used my name. He said, "You." And then he said the job. And 18 years went by like that. The last folder was in a parking garage in Kansas City in the wet part of winter. I opened it against the roof of my own car. Inside, there was an Omega, 26 years old, working the line in his uncle's restaurant in New Orleans. Nice face, tired eyes. Somebody had photographed him through the pass window with a plate of fish in his hands. There was a second page explaining that this boy was going to be married into a family that ran the cold storage and the refrigerated haulage in that city, which meant every kitchen from the river to the lake ordered its shrimp and its ice through them. The marriage was going to end a war between two houses that had been shooting at each other for a decade. I was being paid to make sure the war continued. I stood in that garage with cold water dripping off the pipe overhead, and I thought about the fish plate. That was all. Not ethics. I did not have a shelf for ethics, but I had put a lot of people in the ground, and every one of them had been a man who chose the life. And this was a cook who had been handed to somebody like a set of keys. I called the number and I said no. I had never said no before. That is worth understanding. In 18 years, I had never once given that voice a word he did not want. So the answer came back very polite and very short. "All right," he said. I was 2 rows from my car when the first round went through my back. I remember the sound the concrete made. I remember thinking that whoever it was had been standing in the stairwell the entire time I was reading the file, which meant the answer had never mattered, which meant I had been a loose end before I opened my mouth. I remember the floor coming up, and I remember thinking that it was a stupid place to die. Then I woke up under a sheet. Not a hospital sheet. Table linen. Heavy. Starched, with a fold ironed into it, the kind of thing that goes over a table when a private room has been made ready for guests. It was over my face, and it smelled of soap and cigarettes. I could not move my hands right away. That is the part nobody tells you about dying in one body and arriving in another, and I say that as a man who has now done it once. The wiring does not match. My arms answered late, as though the message had gone the long way around. My chest hurt. My mouth tasted of wine and copper and something floral and awful underneath it. And I knew that taste. I had used a version of it in Tulsa on a man who liked his brandy. I pulled the linen off my face and looked at a ceiling fan turning slowly over a private dining room. And I did not know a single thing in the room. There was a body under me that was not the right length. Smaller hands, a narrower rib cage, and a smell coming off my own skin that I had absolutely no business producing. Green tomato leaf, wet chalk, something ripe and sweet underneath, like muscadines going soft in the sun on the far side of a fence. I had been an alpha my whole adult life. I knew exactly what that scent meant, and I lay there on a folding table with the fan turning, and I let myself be terrified for the length of about 3 breaths, because that is all you get, and then I put it away and started counting exits. There were 2. A service door behind me, and a swinging door to the front. Voices came through the swinging one. A woman crying with the tired regularity of somebody who had been crying for over an hour. A man's voice underneath it saying the same phrase again and again in the register men use when they are managing a room rather than grieving in it. There was a glass on the floor by the table leg. On its side, a red ring drying on the tile. I sat up, and the linen slid off my chest, and I looked down at a white shirt with a wine stain across the front of it and a pair of hands in my lap that were not my hands. Burned scars along the inside of one forearm. The tidy kind you get from an oven rack. A nick across the pad of the left thumb. Short nails. Somebody who worked a line. The face in the mirror behind the bar service station was the face from the folder. I want to be honest about what I felt, because there is a version of this where I say I was horrified. What I felt was recognition, and under the recognition a debt so heavy I could not lift it. Somebody had photographed this boy through a pass window and put him in a locker. I had said no. Then somebody else had said yes, and here I was inside the result, wearing his shirt, tasting the same wine that had stopped his heart. I got off the table. My legs were wrong and I went down on one knee and got up again. Then I pushed through the swinging door into the front of the restaurant, and a room full of people who had been arranging my funeral turned around and looked at me. Nobody screamed. That surprised me. In my experience, people do not scream at the impossible. They go quiet and they look for permission from whoever is in charge of the room. The woman who had been crying was in her 50s, black dress, hair pinned back, and she went the color of the tablecloth. A cousin, I learned later. Odette. She had loved him. The man managing the room was older, silver at the temples. A good suit worn badly. He was in the middle of a sentence and he did not finish it. His eyes came up and stopped on me and I watched him do arithmetic. Not grief. Arithmetic. That was my uncle, Gerard, and that was the first thing I learned about him. The second thing I learned came from a doctor sitting at the corner table with a cup of coffee and a pen still in his hand. He had a folded paper on the tablecloth in front of him with my body's name on it and a time written on it. And when he saw me standing in the doorway, he set the cup down so badly that it went over. Ellis, my uncle said. That was my name now. I filed it and I did not answer, because I had no idea yet how this boy's voice sat in his mouth, and the first sentence out of me was going to be the most dangerous one I ever said. Odette got to me first. She took my face in both hands and made a sound I have no interest in describing. She was warm and she smelled of onions and hairspray, and she held on to me like I was going to leave again, and I stood there with my arms at my sides and let her, because that boy would have let her and because I had nothing else to give her. Over her shoulder I watched Gerard cross to the doctor and speak to him quietly, and I watched the doctor put the folded paper into his inside pocket. The story that got agreed on, without anybody agreeing to it out loud, was that I had fainted. Low blood pressure. A bad reaction to something in the sauce. It went around the room before the plates were cleared, and by the end of the night 3 separate people had told me they had a cousin with the same problem. Nobody said the word poison. Nobody picked up the glass off the floor either. And when I looked for it later, it was gone. And so was the bottle. And so was the boy who had been running wine that night. I want to be clear about my situation, because for the first day I was doing nothing but survival math. I was in a body I could not run in. I did not know it yet in detail, but I knew the outline. Every alpha in that restaurant had turned toward me when I came through the door, a half second of attention they gave without meaning to, and that told me my scent was carrying. I had no suppressants and no idea where this body kept them or whether it used them. I had no money that I could reach without asking a man I already knew had done arithmetic over my corpse. And this body had a schedule written into it that would arrive whether I liked it or not, and when it arrived I would be useless for days. Running is a skill. It costs money, and it costs distance, and it costs a body that will do what you tell it. I had one of those things, and it was the one that had just failed. So I stayed. And I went to work the only way I knew how, which was to stand in a room and be exactly as interesting as the wallpaper while I learned who wanted what. Here is what I learned in the days before the wedding. The war between the 2 houses had been going on since before this body could drink. Gerard's side ran the restaurants, the linen service, the produce trucks, and about a third of the vending in the parish, and had been sliding for years. The other side was Desmond's, and Desmond's side owned the cold chain. Every walk-in freezer, Every refrigerated trailer, every ice plant. If Desmond stopped answering the phone, half the kitchens in the city would be throwing out their inventory by the weekend. That is what real power looks like, and it is why the marriage existed at all. Gerard had a nephew and a losing hand. Desmond had the cold and no reason to be generous. And he had agreed to the marriage anyway, which nobody in Gerard's kitchen could explain. Their arrangement had a clock in it, which I did not learn from Gerard. I learned it from Odette while she pressed a shirt for me in the back room, because she assumed I already knew. "He has to mark you before the families sit down again," she said, with a pin in her mouth. "That's the whole point, baby. Anybody can sign a paper. A bond is a thing they can smell in a room." She looked up at me then, and her face did something complicated and sad, and she took the pin out of her mouth. "You'll have your heat by then," she said. That's how they scheduled it. I stood in that back room with the iron hissing, and I understood that I had been sold, and that the delivery date was a biological event in a body I had been living in for a matter of days. I also understood, standing there, that this was going to be the most useful thing about me. Because I was not going to get within arm's length of the man who bought my death by running, I was going to get there by being handed to the top of this world, wearing a wedding ring, at a table where everybody talked. I met Desmond days before the wedding, at his warehouse on the riverside, which tells you what kind of man he is. He did not send for me to a restaurant or a house. He sent a car, and the car took me to a working building with forklifts moving and a loading bay open to the water, and I was walked past all of it by a driver named Beau, who did not say one word to me the entire trip. Desmond was on the floor with a clipboard, talking to a man in a parka about a compressor. He was tall, and built like somebody who had done physical work before he had money, and he was somewhere near 40. Dark hair cut short, a face that gave you nothing. When he turned around and saw me standing at the end of the aisle in the good shirt Odette had pressed, he finished his sentence to the man in the parka first, which I appreciated, and then he came down the aisle. His scent arrived before he did. I had spent my adult life reading rooms, and I had never been on this end of one. Star anise. Sharp and cold at the front. Damp hemp rope. Underneath it something warm and mechanical. Engine oil off a running motor. It went into my lungs, and my new body responded with an opinion so immediate and so shameless that I had to lock my knees. I kept my face flat. My face has always been flat. That is most of what I was ever hired for. He stopped a polite distance away and looked at me for a while. "You're smaller than the photograph," he said. "Photographs lie." "Not usually." He put the clipboard down on a pallet. "How's your health?" "Fine. You were dead on Tuesday." I fainted. That's what I was told. He said it without any weight at all. And then he did something I have thought about many times. Since, he stepped closer, and he turned his head a fraction, and he breathed in. Once, deliberately, in front of me. The rudest thing one adult can do to another in that world, and he did not pretend otherwise. "Do you know what you smell like right now?" "No. Nothing," he said. "You smell like a man waiting for a bus." He picked the clipboard back up. "Your uncle's people are frightened of me," he said. "The ones who aren't frightened are angry. You're neither. And you were on a table with a sheet over you 4 days ago. I don't know what that makes you yet." Then he told me the terms, and he told them straight, which nobody else had. I would live in his house. I would be given money of my own in an account with my own name on it, and he said the words with my own name on it in a specific manner, like he was setting something down where I could reach it. I would not be required to work in any of his businesses, and I would not be prevented from it. The families would sit down again within weeks. Before that, if I was willing, there would be a bond. And he said if I was willing exactly like that, in a warehouse, in front of a forklift. "And if I'm not willing," I said, "then we'll be 2 men married on paper, and your uncle will find out how little that's worth to me." He looked at me. "That's not a threat to you. That's a threat to him. You'd want to understand the difference." He walked me back to the car himself. At the loading bay, the wind came off the river, and I got a face full of the water and the cold and his scent together, and my hands were not entirely mine for a second. At the car door, he said, "One more thing." I turned. "Anything you eat in my house, I eat first," he said. "That's not romance. Somebody put something in a glass on Tuesday, and everybody at that table has decided to be stupid about it. I'm not going to be stupid about it." Then he shut the door and Bo drove me home, and I sat in the back with my heart going like an engine, and my brand new Omega body telling me a great many things I had no time for. Because I had just learned the most important fact of my life. Somebody had told this man that I fainted, and he did not believe it. He said the word, Tuesday, twice. He was not guessing, and he was not fishing. He knew the boy in that room had died, and he had come to the warehouse anyway, and looked me in the face, and offered me an account with my own name on it. I had no idea yet what that meant. I only knew that I was going to marry a man who was already, quietly, several steps ahead of me. The wedding was small, and it was fast, and it happened in the front room of Desmond's house with maybe 30 people standing up. I wore a dark suit that had been cut for a body that no longer had anybody in it. Odette cried. Gerard shook hands and worked the room and did not look at me twice. There was a judge who did not make eye contact with anybody, and there was cake, which I remember because it was the first thing I had eaten in that house that Desmond had not eaten first. And he noticed me, and he reached over and took a bite off my plate in front of the judge without a word. The man I need to tell you about was standing at the back. He was in his 60s, and he was the only person in that room who was not performing. Gray, thin, good coat, hands folded. He had a face like a closed drawer. Everybody who came through the door found him first with their eyes before they found Desmond, and then corrected. "That's Ambrose," Odette said, under her breath, handing me a glass I did not drink from. He raised him. "Don't be clever near him." Ambrose came over once, near the end. He took my hand in both of his, which was warm and grandfatherly, and lasted a second too long. "You're not what I expected," he said. "No, sir." "Good." He let go. "Desmond has been alone a long time." That was the whole conversation. He went back to the wall. I stood there with a glass I was not drinking, and I could not have told you why my back had gone tight, except that in 18 years of work I had learned that the man who does not need the room to look at him is the man who owns it. I did not know his voice yet. I want to be honest about that too. He said almost nothing to me at my own wedding, in a soft old man's voice, and my ear did not catch on any of it. That came later, and it came in a manner I could not have arranged if I tried. The house was quiet by midnight. Desmond had a room at the end of the hall, and I had one across from it, and neither of us had said a single word about that arrangement, which was its own kind of statement. I did not sleep. I had not slept properly since the linen came off my face. I lay on top of the covers in a strange body in a strange house and listened to the pipes tick and the shrimp trucks running out on the road, and at some point in the worst part of the night I heard the window. It is a specific sound. Old sash, painted over, and somebody easing it up in stages so the sticking parts happen one at a time and read as house noise. I did not move. I let my breathing stay long and dumb, and I listened to a man put his weight through the frame and onto the floorboards, and I placed him by the pull of the rug, and I let him get all the way to the bed, because a man with a wire needs to be close, and close is where I wanted him. I have already told you the rest. What I did not tell you was that it was not clean. In my own body it would have been clean. This body was slower off the mark and lighter than the arm it was pulling, and my shoulder screamed when I turned his wrist, and by the time I had him down I had taken a knee to the ribs I would not have taken in my old life. I got him with the joint and with weight and with the fact that he was not expecting any of it, which is the only reason it worked at all. Then Desmond opened the door. I want you to see what he saw. His Omega husband on the floor in a wedding shirt, sleeve torn, knee planted in a man's spine, dull letter opener resting at the soft place under the jaw where the pulse gives itself up, face flat, breathing steady. He did not shout. He did not reach for me. He stood in the doorframe and took the room apart with his eyes. The window, the wire on the rug, the angle of my knee, and then he looked at my hands. "You've done that before," he said. Under me, the man turned his head against the rug and said, "You're supposed to be dead." Everything in me went cold and clear, because that sentence had two answers. Either he meant the boy from the dinner, and he had been told the job was already finished, and he was here to correct a bill, or he meant me, not the body, me. And a man in a parking garage 2 states away had told somebody he had seen me go down. "Say that again," I said. He did not say it again. Desmond's people came up the stairs then, and there was a great deal of noise and a hood and hands, and they took him down and out through the kitchen. Bo came back for the wire with a dish towel. By the middle of the next morning, that man was dead, in a locked room downstairs with no marks on him. And the doctor who came to look at him used the phrase, heart failure, and I stood in the doorway and smelled the floral thing under the copper, and I said nothing at all. That is when I stopped calling it revenge for a stranger. Somebody had bought a cook's death. Somebody had bought mine. Somebody had bought the death of the man they sent to correct it. Inside this house, in a locked room, hours after Desmond's own men put him there. Whoever it was, they were close enough to reach a glass at Gerard's table and a room in Desmond's basement in the same week, which meant one hand, which meant one man. And I had spent 18 years taking orders from exactly that kind of man, and I had never once seen his face. Desmond found me in that doorway. He put his hand flat between my shoulder blades and moved me out of it without asking, and he shut the door, and then in the hallway he took hold of my chin and turned my face into the light. "Let me see," he said. "It's nothing. Let me see." There was a scrape along my cheekbone from the rug and a split in my lip I had not noticed. His thumb went along under the cut and stopped. Star anise came off him hard, cold at the front. And I learned a thing about alphas I had never learned from the inside, which is that the temper does not smell angry. It smells like a room being closed. "Take the shirt off," he said. "I'm fine. You went down under a man twice your weight and you got up. That is not the same as fine." He had not let go of my face. "Take it off, or I'll do it." I took it off. He walked me back against the hallway wall with 2 fingers. Not force, just a direction. And he went over my ribs with his hands. Slow. Professional at first. He found the boot mark on my left side and pressed, and I made a sound. And his hands stopped being professional. He did not step back. He put his palm flat over the bruise and left it there, warm through the skin. And his other hand was on the wall by my head, and we were close enough that his breath moved the hair at my temple. I could smell the oil under the anise. My new body did what it had been doing since the warehouse, only louder, and there is no hiding it. That is the entire problem with that body, it announces. His head turned very slightly toward my throat. "There it is," he said, low. "There what is? You went quiet all week. Not one honest note off you since the warehouse." His thumb moved once on the bruise. "There you are. Take your hand off me," I said, and I did not mean it. And both of us heard that I did not mean it. He took his hand off me. He stepped back to a proper distance and he picked my ruined shirt off the floor and handed it to me. And his own hand was not entirely steady doing it, which I filed away and thought about for a long time afterward. "There's a doctor coming for your ribs," he said. "Eat something." He was at the stairs when I said, "Why did you marry me?" He stopped with his hand on the rail. "Whoa. Because your uncle offered me a boy in place of a war," he said. "And I wanted to see what kind of man says yes to being offered. Mine. 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 And you don't say yes to anything," Desmond said. "You just stand there and count the doors." He went down the stairs. I stood in that hallway, in the ruin of a wedding shirt with my ribs aching, and I thought, he has known since the warehouse. I was wrong about the timing. He had known since before the warehouse, but I had the shape of it, and the shape kept me up for the rest of that night. They tested me 4 times in the weeks that followed, and I failed every test by passing it. The first was the wine. There was a dinner at Gerard's restaurant to show the parish that the 2 houses now ate at the same table, and halfway through it a waiter poured me a glass of the same red that had been on the floor the night I woke up. Same label. Same year. Somebody had gone to the trouble of finding a bottle. The whole table watched me without appearing to. Odette went white. Gerard talked about the shrimp season. A boy who nearly died from that bottle flinches, or refuses, or laughs about it too loudly. What I did was pick it up, hold it under my nose for a second, set it down untouched, and go on cutting my fish. And that is the response of a man who is checking for almonds and knows what he is checking for. Down the table, Ambrose watched me put the glass down. He did not look away when I caught him at it. He smiled at me like a grandfather at a christening. The second test came to the restaurant kitchen. I had started going in on the quiet mornings because the house was making me stupid, and because a kitchen is a good place to hear things, and because Odette needed hands. A man in a delivery jacket came in with a crate that nobody had ordered and asked for me by name, and asked if the young mister could break down a case of drum for him because his own guy was out. Odette started to say something. I put a knife in my hand and I went to work on the fish. I got 2 down before I understood what I had done. The grip was wrong. A cook holds a blade with the thumb and forefinger pinched on the spine, up on the metal, because the blade is a tool and the wrist does the work. I had my hand back on the handle with my thumb along the top, low and locked, because in my hand a blade had never been a tool. The fish came apart fine. That was not the point. Any cook in that room could have looked at my hand and known that whoever was holding that knife had never learned to hold it in a kitchen. The man in the delivery jacket looked at my hand for a while. Then he thanked me and took his crate and left, and no delivery slip ever turned up for it. The third test I only understood later. Somebody called the house and asked to speak to Ellis, and when I answered, they hung up. That happened 3 or 4 times. The fourth was a man at a funeral I was made to attend, who came up close in a crowd and said the name of the boy's mother, who had died when he was 11, and waited to see what my face did. My face did nothing. That was the failure. A man hearing his dead mother's name in a crowded room does something, even if it is only a flicker, and I gave them a wall. So they knew. Not what I was, because there is no what I am, but that the thing walking around in that suit was not the boy they had put a sheet over. And here is what interested me. Standing in a funeral parlor with my heart flat and my hands loose. They were frightened. You do not test a man 4 times if you are sure. You test him because you cannot explain him, and men in that business cannot leave a thing they cannot explain. And the pressure of not being able to explain me was making somebody move. I wanted them moving. A man who is comfortable never shows you his hand. Meanwhile, I was learning the house, and the house was Desmond. He worked in a way I had not seen before. Everything ran through cold. If a restaurant on the east side got difficult about payments, he did not send anybody to break a window. Their delivery slot moved from before dawn to the middle of the afternoon, and their fish sat on a hot loading dock for a few hours, and the problem resolved itself by the end of the week. He had people on payroll all over the parish, and he knew what their mothers were sick with. He also fed me constantly, which I did not have a category for. Every morning there was coffee already poured at my place and a plate under a dish. He never made anything of it. He would be at the far end reading freight schedules, and the plate would be there, and if I did not eat it, he would notice without looking up and say something about the shrimp being fresher on Thursdays. The first week I checked every plate. The second week I noticed he was eating from mine before I sat down, every single time, without any performance. A bite off the corner, and then back to his schedules. He never once mentioned that he was doing it. I had been in this world for a matter of weeks, and I had begun to understand that this was how the man talked, and I was falling into it, which was a professional catastrophe. Because here is the thing I had not planned for. I had spent my life being useful to a voice on a telephone. Nobody had ever fed me. Nobody had ever put a coat over the back of my chair because the cold room is kept a hair above freezing and I would forget. Nobody had ever looked at a bruise on my ribs and gotten angry at somebody else about it. I did not have any defense built for that, because nobody had ever attacked me from there. The cold room happened in the middle of an ordinary working week. I had gone to the warehouse to see the books, which I had talked my way into by telling Desmond I could count, and he had said, "I know," in an unpleasantly amused tone and given me a desk. I was in the walk-in with a clipboard checking pallets of shrimp against a manifest that had a discrepancy in it, and I did not hear the door, because that door is built not to be heard. He came in with a coat over his arm and stopped when he saw me on my knees with the clipboard. "You're going to freeze," he said. "I'm nearly finished." "You're blue." "I'm nearly finished." He put the coat around my shoulders from behind and did not take his hands off it. And the cold room is a small metal box, with cold air pouring down out of the ceiling unit, and his scent had nowhere to go. It filled it, anise and rope and hot oil in a metal box, cold enough to see your own breath, and my hands stopped working the pen. I stood up. I turned around. That was the mistake, if it was a mistake. He backed me into the steel door with his hand behind my head so I would not crack it, which is the detail I have never been able to get out of my memory, that he was violent about it and careful in the same second. His mouth came down on mine and I got a fistful of his shirt and pulled, and the coat went off my shoulders onto the wet floor and neither of us went after it. He kissed like he ran freight. No hurry and no hesitation and absolute certainty about where everything was going. His hand came up under the back of my shirt, palm flat on my spine, dragging me in, and his skin was so much warmer than the room that I made a noise into his mouth that I would have paid money to take back. He heard it. He went after it. He got his mouth off mine and onto my jaw and then down under my ear, right over the gland, and he did not bite. He breathed there, hot, and my knees quit. "That's the second honest thing you've given me," he said against my throat. "Don't count them. I've been counting them since the warehouse." I got my hand in his hair and pulled his head back up and kissed him again, because it was the only method available to me for shutting the conversation down, and it worked poorly. He made a sound of his own then, low, and lifted me off my feet against the door and held me there, and I got a leg around him without any decision being involved, and the manifest went into the water on the floor. The compressor kicked on overhead. Cold air came down over both of us, and I could feel my own scent going up like a flare in that closed metal room, green and wet and sweet under, and his going up to meet it, and where they met in the middle it was not either of us. It was the smell of the river when the tide turns, that half hour when the water changes its mind and runs backward, and you can taste it in the air. He stopped. He put his forehead against mine with my back on the steel and both of us breathing hard, and he said, "Not in a freezer. Not for you." Then he picked the ruined coat off the floor and put it around me anyway, wet, and walked me out into the warm. I stood in the loading bay in a soaked coat and shook, and it was not from the cold. And I thought about the fact that I had a job to do and a man to find and a leash to cut, and that I had just spent a long stretch of a working day not thinking about any of it. That was when I understood I was in trouble. And it was not the kind you can shoot your way out of. I went looking for the doctor because I wanted the paper. A death certificate is a piece of machinery. It has a time on it and a hand on it and a copy of it somewhere, and I had watched a man put one in his inside pocket while my uncle stood over him, and men who take papers into their pockets in front of witnesses are men who have been told what to do with them. He had an office above a shoe repair on a street with 2 bars on it. I went in the afternoon when his girl was at lunch. He was older than I remembered, and he had the face of a man who had not slept properly since the dinner. And when he looked up and saw me in his doorway, he put his pen down very carefully, the same as he had put down the coffee cup. "I want the copy," I said. "There isn't one. There's always one." He took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes with his thumb and finger for a long time. "Son," he said, and stopped, and started again. "I have signed that form 400 times. I know what a stopped heart sounds like through a stethoscope, and I know what it does to a face. I have been telling myself for weeks that I made a mistake in a bad light in a loud room. Did you?" "No." We looked at each other. "Who has it?" I said. He did not want to answer. I did not press him. I stood there and let the silence get expensive, which is a technique. And after a while he said, "It was collected. That night. Before I got to my car." "Collected by who?" "By people who do not give a receipt," he said. "You're married to him. Ask him." So I went home and I asked him. It was late. He was at the kitchen table with the freight schedules and a bottle of something he had not opened, and I stood in the doorway with my coat still on and said, "You have a piece of paper with my name and a time of death on it." Desmond put down his pen. "Yes," he said. Everything in the room got very quiet and very loud at once. "Since when?" "Since about 90 minutes after it was written." He pushed his chair back and stood up. "Come on." He took me down the hall to the room he used as an office, and he opened the safe in the floor under the desk, and he did not make any drama out of it. He simply took out a folded paper and handed it to me. It was the boy's name in the doctor's hand. It was the date of the betrothal dinner. It was a time in the middle of the evening, before the cheese course. "I bought it off the table before your uncle's man got to it," he said. "I've had it since. Nobody else has seen it. I stood in that office and held a piece of paper that said I was dead, and I heard my own voice come out wrong for the first time since I woke up. You knew at the warehouse. I knew before the warehouse. You married me anyway." "Yes." "Why?" He leaned back against the desk and folded his arms, and he took his time, and when he spoke he was not performing anything. "Because I stood in the back of that dining room while a doctor wrote a time on a form," he said. and I watched a room full of men decide, in under an hour, that a boy who had been killed at his own dinner had fainted. Every one of them. His uncle, his cousin, the men who worked with him for 6 years. Not one of them said the word out loud, because saying it out loud would have cost them something. And he was cheap. He looked at the paper in my hand. Then he stood up and walked through the door, Desmond said. And I thought, if that boy has come back from wherever, he is not going back into that house. And he is not going to a family that would sell him again. And there is exactly one place in this city where nobody can reach him without going through me. You wanted to protect a stranger. I wanted to protect the only person at that dinner who did not have a price, he said. That's not the same as knowing who you are. I don't know who you are. You know how to take a wire off a man in the dark, and you don't flinch at a bottle, and you count doors in a room you've slept in for a month. And you have never once, not for a second, been afraid of me. And every Omega I have ever met in this city has been afraid of me by the 3rd minute. He said that without pride. If anything, it was flat and tired. And I understood then that he had been alone in a way I recognized from the inside. So, Desmond said, "Are you going to tell me?" I had been running a version of this conversation in my head since the warehouse. I had 6 answers built. I looked at that man standing against his own desk with his arms folded, waiting, and I gave him a 7th that I had not built, which is the worst thing a professional can do. "I'm not Ellis," I said. "Ellis died at that table. I don't know how I got here. I woke up under the linen, and I had his hands, and I've been trying to keep them alive ever since." Desmond did not move for a long moment. "All right," he said. "That's it? What else is there? You could tell me a story and I'd have no method of checking it." He unfolded his arms. "You just told me a thing that gets you killed in every room in this parish. That's not nothing. You could put me out." "I could." He stepped in front of me. "Do you want to talk about what I actually want to do?" I should have said something clever. I did not have anything. He took the paper out of my hand and dropped it on the desk, and he put his hands on either side of my neck with his thumbs under my jaw and tipped my head back, and he leaned in and put his face against my throat. Scenting is a formality in that world. Families do it at weddings, and it means about as much as a handshake. There was nothing formal about this. He dragged his cheek slow along the gland under my ear, once, and then again the other side. And I heard the sound he made when my scent came up under his mouth, and my hands got into his shirt without asking me. "Say stop and I stop," he said against my skin. I did not say stop. He got his arm under me and put me on the desk, and everything on it went off the edge, and his mouth came down on the hinge of my jaw, and then lower, on the gland itself, mouthing at it, not biting, and my back came off the wood. He had a hand spread on my thigh, and my legs had already made a decision without me. There is no dignity in that body. I had spent my whole life as the other thing, and I had never in my life understood what it was to have every nerve in my neck wired directly to my spine, and he knew what he was doing, and he was not hurrying, and I was making noises against his shoulder that I had never made in either life. I got his shirt open and my hands flat on his chest, and he stopped breathing for a second, which did more for me than anything he had done so far. "You've been in my house a month," he said, low, at my ear, "and you sleep across the hall with a chair under the handle. You notice that. I notice everything about you." He got his hand up under my shirt and spread it over the fading bruise on my ribs, and pressed, careful, deliberate, and my whole self went stupid. "Which room?" I said. "Yours." He picked me up off the desk. I got my mouth on his throat on the way and felt his hand tighten on the back of my thigh hard enough to leave marks. And then somewhere in the hall he stopped and put his forehead against mine, and he was shaking, which I had not known alphas did. "Not tonight," he said. "You're joking. Your heat is close. I can smell it starting." His voice was in pieces. "If I take you tonight, I'll want to mark you, and you'll let me. And then you'll wake up bonded to a man you married because your uncle sold you. You'll have that when you choose it in your right mind and not 1 hour before." I looked at him in the dark of that hallway, at a man who ran the cold in a city and had me off my feet and put me down anyway, and I felt the last professional part of me go out like a pilot light. He put me down. He kissed me once more, slow, with his hand on my face. "There's a chair under your handle," he said. "Leave it there tonight. It's not for me." And that was the sentence that saved my life. days later. I woke in the dark to the handle of my door turning. It went down slow and came up against the chair and stopped. And then it turned again, harder, and the chair legs skidded a little on the boards and held. By the time I had the chair out of the way and the door open, there was nothing in that hallway but the smell of the house, and no window in it was open, which meant whoever had stood there had walked up the stairs from inside. In the morning, nobody would say a word about it. Bo checked the locks and looked at the floor. Desmond stood in the doorway of that room for a long time and did not say anything at all, and that afternoon he moved me across the hall into his. The preheat started as a taste. Everything went slightly metallic first, and my hands ran hot, and I stopped being able to sit still in a chair. Odette turned up at the house with a bag of things she did not explain and put them on my bed, soft old shirts and a blanket that smelled of her kitchen, and she said, "Don't fight it, baby. It makes it worse," and left before I could say anything. I had gone through rut plenty of times in my old life. I had assumed it was the same thing from the other side. It is not. Rut is a fist. This was something else. This was my own body deciding, over a matter of days, that it did not care what I wanted, and every time Desmond came into a room, the floor tipped. He slept on top of the covers with his back to me, and his hand loose around my ankle, and did not touch me otherwise, and I lay awake in the dark with my face full of anise and rope and warm oil, and thought seriously about setting the house on fire. I had days before it turned into the real thing. That was the clock, and I still did not have a name. I had the ledger discrepancy by then. That was the piece of actual work I had done in that house, sitting at the desk Desmond gave me, with a coffee going cold, running the trailer list against the fuel records against the manifests. Every refrigerated trailer on that fleet runs its own cooling unit off its own fuel tank. So every one of them shows up in the fuel records month after month, all year, forever. There were trailers on that list that had been built and serviced and insured for years and had never once burned a gallon. 9 of them. Ghosts. Running produce that did not exist. From a depot that turned out to be a slab, a fence, and a portable office out past the airport. Somebody had been eating that company from the inside for a very long time, in small, careful bites, since before Desmond was old enough to sign anything. And that is why the wedding was dangerous to him. When 2 families join, the lawyers put both sets of books on the same table and go through them line by line. Whoever owned those 9 trailers was weeks away from being found. So the thief needed the war to continue, because the war was the only thing keeping the books apart. That was the first thing I understood, and it was the first thing that made sense of a dead cook. I found the thief himself days later, and I found him by accident. There was a dinner at the house for the men who mattered. The kind of evening where nothing gets decided and everything gets shown. And I was on the stairs with a glass of water because standing in a warm room full of alphas had stopped being possible for me. Below and to the left, through the half-open door of Desmond's office, somebody was on the telephone. I could not hear the words. I could hear the shape of the sentences. Low, patient. A man saying almost nothing while somebody at the other end explained themselves at length. Then the call ended, and the voice said 2 words, and I heard my own blood. All right, that was all. 2 words. Polite, short, no weight on either of them. And I was back in a parking garage in Kansas City with water coming off a pipe and a folder in my hand, hearing exactly that and knowing already, before I hung up, that it was the last thing that voice was ever going to say to me. The office door opened. Ambrose came out, putting his telephone away, and he saw me on the stairs with my glass of water, and he stopped. Everything I had was in my face. I could feel it. My face would not hold. That body would not let me have it. And I was in preheat, and my scent went off like a dropped tray. Ambrose looked up at me on those stairs for a long moment. "You should sit down," he said gently. "You look unwell." Then he went back into the party. I want to say I acted with discipline after that. I did not. I gave myself until the middle of the night, and then I went out the kitchen door with a coat over my shoulders and drove out past the airport to that depot with the address on a piece of paper in my pocket, because I had days at most before my own body took me off the board, and because I had spent my whole life belonging to that voice, and I could not sit in a house and wait. The office was a portable building on blocks with a bad lock. The books were in a filing drawer that had been painted shut and then unpainted, which told me it got opened regularly. 2 sets. The real one and the one for other people. 9 trailers. A depot that was a fence. Signatures. I had them under my coat when the lamp on the desk came on. Ambrose was sitting in the chair in the corner with his hands folded, in an overcoat, like a man waiting for a train. "You're quick for somebody in your condition," he said. "You've been here a while." "I've been here since you left the house." He nodded at my coat. "Take them. They're photocopies. The originals went in the river the week the lawyers started." I stood very still. "You know what I keep coming back to," Ambrose said. "It isn't the boy standing up at his own dinner. Men come back sometimes. Bad light, a slow heart, a doctor who's had a drink. I've seen it twice. Then what? You're not afraid of me," he said. He got up. He was an old man, and there was nothing frightening about the mechanics of him, and my back was against the filing cabinet. "Everybody in this parish is afraid of me, and not one of them could tell you why." He put his hat on. "You look at me like a plumber looking at a pipe. I've paid good money for men who look at people like that." "Have you?" I said. "Reliable men." He was at the door. "They don't last. They get an opinion eventually. Then, they're a problem, and then, they're not." He opened the door and let the wet air in. "Go home, son," Ambrose said. "You've got 2, maybe 3 days before you're no use to anybody. Spend them with your husband. It'll be kinder for you than the alternative." Then he was gone, and I stood in a portable building with photocopies under my coat and understood that he had let me take them, because a man in my condition with an armful of paper and no time was the least dangerous thing in that parish. He had also called me son. That was not affection. He had said it exactly like a man who already knew where I came from. They came for me on the road. 2 of them, 1 car. And they did it correctly. They put me off the shoulder into the ditch grass and had my door open before the dust settled. In my old body, I would have been out and behind the engine block. In this one, I got a hand on the first man's collar and pulled him down into the door frame and felt something in my shoulder tear. And everything after that was worse. My scent was screaming. That was the part I had not planned for and could not have. He got a fistful of my hair and got his face into my throat and stopped. Actually stopped, because a preheating omega at close range does something to the front of an alpha's brain, and that half second of him being stupid is the only reason I am here. I got the door edge into his temple. Twice. Then I got his weight off me, and I got a hand around a rock in the ditch, and the second man decided he did not want any of it and put the car in reverse and left him. I lay in the ditch in the wet grass with my shoulder ruined and paper scattered all around me in the dark. And I laughed. And then I stopped laughing, because I could not get up. Bo found me. Desmond had put a man on me a month earlier and had never mentioned it. And I have never decided how I feel about that. And it does not matter, because Bo came down that ditch with his coat off and his hands shaking and got me into the car, and then went back for every page of that paper on his hands and knees in the dark, which is the sort of man he is. I remember the drive in pieces. I remember Desmond's face when the car came up the drive. I remember being carried, which no one had done since I was a child in a state home with a fever. I remember him putting me down on his bed, and his hands going over me looking for holes, and his scent gone so wrong with fear that it burned my eyes. And I remember, in the middle of it, saying, "It's Ambrose." I did not get to say the rest. That is the part I have gone over and over. I had the ghosts and the depot and the 2 words on the telephone, and I had a whole architecture built. And I got one name out of my mouth before the fever took me under, and when I came back up, the house was full of men, and it was already too late. The 2 houses sat down in the long room at the front of Desmond's house because that meeting had been on the calendar since before the wedding, and nobody was going to move it for a sick omega upstairs. I came down anyway. I had a fever and a strapped shoulder, and I could not have run to the end of the drive, and I went down those stairs holding the rail because I had one name and no proof that anybody would look at, and because a man who is not in the room does not get a vote. Ambrose had gotten there first. Of course he had. He had been getting there first since before I was born. There were maybe 15 men in that room. Gerard, on one side with his people, Desmond at the head of the table with Bo standing behind him, and Ambrose, in his good coat, standing at the sideboard as though he were arranging the coffee. "Before we start," Ambrose said, "there's a housekeeping matter." He put a folder on the table. I knew that folder, not what was in it. The folder itself. Every job I had ever taken had come in one exactly like it. The same cheap card, the same 2 brass fasteners. For 18 years, because the man who put my jobs together bought his supplies in the same shop his whole life. So, the folder in Ambrose's hands had not come out of a police file or a piece of gossip. It had come off the desk of the man who sold me my work. There was only one person in the world who could have asked him for it. And that person was standing at the sideboard arranging the coffee. Somebody explained to me, Ambrose said, why a boy who works a fish line held a wireman off the floor on his wedding night. Nobody spoke. He opened the folder and laid the pages out along the table like a man dealing cards. A photograph of Ellis through a pass window with a plate in his hands. A page of terms, and then a second photograph, older, grainy, taken at distance across a hotel car park in another state, of a man in his 30s getting out of a car. It was my own face, the one I was born with. That's the contractor, Ambrose said. Kansas City. 18 years in the business, never used a name, never met a client. He was engaged in the winter to remove the boy in the first picture, so that this marriage would never happen. He tapped the terms page. He took the job and then he refused it, and about an hour later somebody put him down in a parking garage. He looked up at the room, and then the boy dies at his own betrothal dinner. Ambrose said, in front of 40 people, with a doctor at the table, and gets up and moves into this house, and can take a wire off a professional in the dark. Gerard had gone gray. I put it to this table, Ambrose said, that the boy died as arranged, and that what has been living in this house for a month, in Desmond's bed, is the man in the second photograph, sent in behind a dead face by whoever had the most to gain from the wedding failing. He turned his hands over. I don't say Gerard knew. I say somebody in his house did. It was beautiful. I could admire it even standing there in a fever with my ears ringing. He had taken every true thing in that room and stacked it into the only shape that ended with his own name nowhere on the table. Gerard stood up so fast his chair went over. That is not my nephew, he said. I have said so for weeks. I said so at the funeral of a man who is not dead. That thing is not my nephew, and my house does not answer for it. He did not look at me once while he said it. My uncle, the man who had held my funeral and then walked me down an aisle, Desmond had not moved. He was still sitting at the head of the table with his hands flat on the wood, and he was looking at the second photograph. Is that you? He said. He did not shout it. The room went so quiet you could hear the ice machine in the kitchen. I could have lied. There was a version available. The photograph was grainy and taken at distance, and my face was in the ground in Missouri, and I could have stood there and said no and made them prove it. Yes, I said. Somebody at Gerard's end of the table swore. You were hired to kill him, Desmond said. Yes. You knew that when you told me you woke up under the linen. Yes. You've sat at my table for a month. I refused the job, I said. That's why I'm in this room. That's why there's a hole in me in a garage in Kansas City. I said no, and they killed me for it, and I woke up in the boy they killed instead. And every single thing I have done since has been to find the man who bought both. I got that far, and then I made the mistake I had been trying not to make for weeks, which is that I told the truth in a room where I could not prove it. The man who hired me is standing at the sideboard, I said. Ask him about the 9 trailers on his own fleet that have never burned a gallon of fuel. Ambrose did not even turn around. He set the coffee pot down and said quietly, in the tone you use for a sick relative, He's in heat, gentlemen. He's not fit to be questioned. And that finished it. Every alpha in that room had been trying not to smell me since I came down the stairs. He handed them a reason to stop listening, and they took it with both hands. Then a man at the far end said the thing that had been sitting in the room the whole time. He said that a killer in the house was a debt, and debts get settled, and that Gerard's people could bring the settlement out to the yard themselves if they wanted to keep any goodwill in the parish. Then Desmond stood up. I want to tell this part exactly. He stood up and he put both hands in his pockets, and he looked down the table at 15 men, who between them could shut the river, and he said, I married a name on a piece of paper. There's nobody in this house by that name. The room breathed out. He goes out of the parish tonight, Desmond said. Bo takes him. Nobody follows the car. If a man in this room sends somebody after that car, he and I will have a different conversation, and it won't be at a table." He looked at Gerard. "Your family's debt for putting him here gets discussed on Friday. Sit down." He did not look at me. Not once. Not when Beau came around the table and took my good arm. Not when I went past his chair close enough to touch him. Not when the front door opened and the wet air came in. The last thing I heard from that room was Ambrose saying that it was a hard thing, and that Desmond had done the right one, in a voice like a hand on a shoulder. I had been thrown away before. I want that understood, because it changes what happened next. I had been a file that got lost on purpose. I had been 18 years of work for a man who called me you. Nobody had ever said my name in a room where it mattered, and I had made my peace with that a long time before. Or I thought I had, but I had eaten off that man's plate for a month. He had put a coat on me in a freezer. He had put me down in a hallway and told me I would have it when I chose it in my right mind. There's nobody in this house by that name. I got into the car and I did not say anything at all, and Beau drove east with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set. The heat took me the next day in a fish camp on stilts over brown water in Mississippi. 3 rooms and a generator and a screen door. And I would not wish that on the men I have killed. I do not remember most of it. I remember cold water and a bathtub. I remember being furious, which is not in any of the books. But I was so angry. I tore a pillow apart with my hands. I remember that everything smelled like nothing, and my body kept looking for anise and rope and warm oil, and finding wet cypress and mildew, and my own scent going out into a house with nobody in it. I remember saying his name into a mattress, like a man with a fever says anything, and hating myself with a purity I have not achieved before or since. Beau slept in the truck with the windows up. He was there in the morning with water and rice and clean sheets, and he did not come past the doorway once. Not one time in all those days, and when I could sit up he told me he had a daughter my body's age and then never mentioned it again. The heat broke on a gray afternoon with rain coming across the water in sheets. I sat on the porch of that camp with a blanket around me and my shoulders strapped, and I made a list. Because that is what I am. The ghosts. The depot. The doctor's copy. The man in the delivery jacket who never brought a slip. The wire man. Dead in a locked room. 2 words on a telephone. None of it was proof. All of it was mine. And on the 9th morning, when Beau came up the steps with the rice, I asked him the question I had been chewing since the car. "Who's paying for this place?" Beau put the bag down. "He is," he said. Beau would not say anything else about it, so I made him say it in pieces over the days that followed, because a man alone on a porch has nothing but time. The camp belonged to a freight broker in Gulfport who owed the cold chain a favor. The generator had been serviced the week of my wedding. There was a case of the suppressants Odette buys in the cabinet under the sink, for afterward, when they would be any use, and a doctor's number written on the inside of the door, and neither of those had been packed the night I left, because there was no night I left. There had been a bag in the trunk of that car for a month. He had built me a place to be thrown to before he ever had to throw me. I sat with that for days and I could not make it come out clean. Both things were true. He had made a plan to keep me alive, and he had used the one sentence that could take the floor out from under me, and I did not know how to hold those in the same hand. I got the shoulder working again. I walked the shell road out to the highway and back every morning until my legs stopped shaking. I ate what Beau brought. I fixed the screen door because it drove me insane. Twice I got as far as taking the keys off the hook in the kitchen, and both times Beau was sitting on the steps of the truck in the dark, not stopping me, just sitting there. And both times I put them back. On the 10th day, the rain came in hard off the water and stayed, and in the middle of it a second set of headlights came up the shell road. I was on the porch with a rice bowl. I watched the car stop and the door open and Desmond get out into it without a coat. He walked up that road with rain coming off him and his shirt stuck to his back and stopped at the bottom of the steps, and he did not come up. We looked at each other for a while. "Say it from there," I said. "All right." He put his hands in his pockets. "I stood in a room full of men who had already decided what you were, and I said there was nobody in my house by your name. I knew exactly what that would do to you when I said it. Then why? Because it was the only sentence that would keep every one of them off this road," he said. "If I had defended you, Half that table walks out and starts making calls, and there are not enough men on my payroll to hold this parish and hold you at the same time. If I say the marriage is nothing, you're nothing, and men don't chase nothing." His voice went. "So I made you nothing in front of a room. That's what I did, not to protect you from a threat you can't see. I knew the thing you can't stand in this world is being nobodies, and I used it, because it worked. The rain came down between us. You had a bag in that trunk for a month," I said. "Yes, you planned to throw me away before you knew there was a reason." "I planned to have somewhere to put you if the day came," he said. "You've had somewhere to be put since the first week. That's what I do. I don't fight in rooms. I move things before they need moving." He looked up at me, and then off at the water. "And it doesn't make it. You were on your feet in a fever with a torn shoulder, and you'd just told a room full of men the truth about yourself for nothing, and I let you go out that door hearing that. I've done bad things for money. None of them sit on me like that one. You didn't look at me. No, not once. If I had looked at you," Desmond said, "not one man in that room would have believed a word I said." I came down 2 steps into the rain. 9 days, I said. "I know how many. You knew where I was every hour and you didn't come. I couldn't come. Not while you were in it." Something moved through him then. "If I had walked into that camp with you in the middle of it, you would have said yes to anything I wanted, and I would have taken it, and it would have been the same as the rest of them. So I sat in my kitchen every night doing arithmetic about how fast I could get here, and there is no arrangement of words that makes that a good thing about me. Why now?" He took his hands out of his pockets and held one of them up, and there was a manila envelope in it, ruined by the rain. "Because on Friday I gave a table full of men an audit," he said, "and there are 9 reefers on my fleet that have never burned a gallon of fuel." I came down the rest of the steps. "You gave me a name before the fever took you," Desmond said. "I've spent 9 days on it. I did not have anything ready. In the end I got both hands in his wet shirt and pulled, and he came into me so hard we nearly went down in the shell. He got his hands on my face and kissed me in the rain like a man who had been running the arithmetic every night. And my back hit the porch post and his mouth went off mine and down under my jaw, over the gland, and the sound he made when my scent came up out of the cold and the wet was not a human noise. "Say it," he said into my throat. "Say something true. I've had 9 days of nothing. I hated the smell of that house," I said. "There was nothing in it. I kept looking for you in a room, with nobody in it." His hands went into my hair. I got his shirt open with the rain running down both of us and put my mouth on his collarbone and bit. Not hard, and he swore and lifted me off my feet and got me up the steps and through the screen door I had fixed with my own hands. The bed in that camp was a bad bed. Neither of us cared. He put me down on it, soaking wet with his forearm, braced under my neck, and everything he had been holding still for a month came off him at once. And I got my hands under his shirt and dragged it off, and the smell of him with the rain on him was so much that my hands stopped being reliable. He went slow anyway. That is the part that undid me. He had me in a room in the middle of nowhere, with my legs already around him, and he took his time, mouth at the corner of my jaw, then under my ear, then the long, slow drag down the side of my throat that made my spine come off the mattress, and every time I tried to hurry him, he put a hand flat on my hip and held me down. 9 days, he said against the gland. "I'm not rushing this. I'm going to hit you. You can hit me after." I got my mouth on his and my hands on his belt, and he caught both my wrists in one of his and put them over my head on the mattress and held them there, and looked at me, and I have never in either life been looked at like that. "Not yet," he said, and his voice was in pieces. "Your heat's finished. A mark only takes in a heat or a rut, and I am not doing this to you twice. I don't care about the mark. You will." He let my wrists go and put his forehead on mine. "When it happens, I want you sober and out of a fever, and I want the man who bought you in the ground first, so that when you say yes, there's nobody left in the world who can say you were sold." Then he kissed me until the rain stopped, and we did a great many things that were not that, and I will keep those. Somewhere near dawn, in the dark, with his arm across my back and his hand spread between my shoulder blades, I told him the rest of it. The state home, the telephone, the folder in the locker, the 18 years, the parking garage and the 2 words. I did not give him my name. I had not said that out loud to another person since I was 15 years old, and I could not make my mouth do it. And he did not ask, which I noticed. He listened the whole way through without saying anything. Then he said, "Say the 2 words again." "All right." Desmond lay there in the dark for a long moment. "He says that to me," he said. "He has said that to me my whole life. Here is what I could give him, and it was the only thing in my life that had ever been worth anything. I was the contract itself. Not a witness, and not a theory. I had been the man on the other end of that telephone for 18 years, and I still had the number, because it lived in my head and not in any phone. And a man in my old trade does not write things down. Desmond did the rest, and he did it as he does everything, quietly and out of sight until it is already finished. He did not go to the table with an accusation. He went to the table with a schedule. He announced an audit of the fleet, which nobody could object to, because a merger of 2 houses means lawyers looking at trailers. He put Bo on the doctor above the shoe repair, who had kept his own carbon of that certificate after all, in a coffee tin under the sink. Because frightened men keep things, and who agreed to come and say out loud what he had written. He found the driver in the delivery jacket working a crate route in Metairie, and that man gave up who had sent him for the price of not losing the route. And he found the broker. I gave him the folders. That is all it took in the end. One shop had been selling that card and those fasteners since before I ever took a job, and a shop like that keeps accounts. And an account had a name on it, and the name belonged to a man in his 70s in a bungalow in Gretna with a hip that had gone bad. He was the one who put the jobs together. He had never met me either. Desmond did not have to do anything unpleasant to him. He offered him the cold chain, which is to say he offered him ice and trucks and a quiet retirement. And the old man took it without an argument, worth the name. The 2 houses came back to that long room on a gray afternoon with the rain finished and the air heavy. Gerard was there. Ambrose was at the sideboard with the coffee, where he had always been. 15 men, the same 15. And when I came in behind Desmond, every head in the room turned, and there was a noise from Gerard's end that I enjoyed a great deal. "Sit down," Desmond said. He put the audit on the table first. 9 trailers, fuel records, the slab and the fence out past the airport with a lease that had been signed the year Desmond turned 19. He let them read it. He said almost nothing while they did, which is the thing about him that I had learned to watch for, that his quiet is not an absence. It is a hand on a valve. Then he put the doctor's carbon down, with the time on it, and the doctor stood up at the end of the room, in front of every man there, and said that he had written it himself and that the boy had been dead when he wrote it. Then he put down a page from the old man in Gretna. Dates on one side, money on the other, going back years. 1 line in the winter of this year for a job taken and then refused. And under it, the same night, a second payment to a different man, which is what it costs to shoot the first one in a parking garage. Ambrose looked at the papers for a while. He did not touch them. "That's a great deal of paper," he said, "and not one signature." "No," Desmond said. "Then it's a story." "It is." Desmond looked at me. This was the part we could not be sure of. A man like him could have put that telephone in the river the same night he stood at the sideboard, but he had carried it on him for as long as I had been his, because a line like that does not live in a drawer, and a man does not throw away the only thing in the world that is entirely his. I took out the phone Bo had bought at a gas station on the highway, and I dialed a number I had been dialing since I was 17 years old, and I set it down on the table in the middle of all that paper, and I let it ring. In the quiet of that room, inside Ambrose's coat, something started to buzz. It went on for a long time. Nobody in that room moved. He did not reach for it, and he did not stand up, and he looked across the table at me with his hands folded, and for 1 second the closed drawer of his face came open, and I saw what was in it. He had made me, 15 years old in a state home with a lost file. He had paid for a boy who would answer a phone, and grown him, and used him, and put him down. And now the boy was standing in his own dining room in somebody else's body with the number still in his head. The buzzing stopped. "Well," Ambrose said. Desmond stood up. "Say something to me," he said. The old man considered it. "And I will give him this." He did not perform. "You were never going to be enough on your own," he said. "That's all. Somebody has to hold the thing together, and it was never going to be you." "All right," said Desmond. He said it exactly like his teacher. What happened after that was settled by 15 men at a table, and it is not mine to tell. I was not in the room for the end of it. I know that Ambrose went out of the parish, and that his name has not been said aloud in that house since, and that a slab and a fence past the airport got sold to a fertilizer company. I know that Desmond did not lay a hand on him. He took the money, the trucks, the routes, the men, and the 50 years of standing in the back of rooms, and he left the man himself alive with none of it, in a rented place in another state, and I have come to understand that in his particular business, that is the crueler of the two available outcomes. Gerard lost the restaurant. He signed it over that week as the settlement for putting me in that house, which was funny in a way that took me weeks to be able to laugh at. Desmond put Odette's name on the license. She cried on the sidewalk and then went inside and fired 2 people, and the shrimp got better within a month. And on a warm night at the end of all of it, in his kitchen, with the freight schedules pushed to one side, Desmond put his hand flat on the table and said, "It's starting." I had smelled it coming for days. Everything about him had gone up in volume. The anise had gone dark, and the oil had gone hot, and the house was full of him. "How long do you get?" I said. 3 days. 4. He was gripping the table. "Bo will drive you to the camp tonight, and I'll call you when." "No." He looked up. "You said when the man who bought me was in the ground," I said. "He's not in the ground. He's in a rented room in Alabama with nothing, which you did on purpose, and there is nobody left in this world who can say I was sold. So, I'm not going to the camp. Think about what you're saying. I have thought about nothing else since a hallway with a chair under a handle. I came around the table. I got handed to a voice on a telephone when I was 15. Then I got handed to you across a table with a war on it. He asked me either time. I put my hand on the back of his neck. "Ask me." He got up out of that chair very slowly. "Do you want this?" he said. "Yes." "Say it with the rest of it. Say the whole thing." "I want you to mark me," I said. "I want it tonight. I want it in your own house, and I want it done by a man who has never once in his life taken a thing off me that I did not hand him." Desmond had me off my feet before I finished the sentence. He got me up the stairs with my legs around him and my mouth on his throat, and the door came off the wall, and we did not make it to the bed the first time. He put me against the door with his hand behind my head, the same as he had against the door of a freezer. And his mouth went down my throat and stopped over the gland, and he stayed there breathing while my hands tore his shirt open. "Tell me if it's too much," he said. "In rut I won't always ask. You'll ask. You always ask." He did ask. All night, between everything else, over and over in a voice that was barely working, and every single time I said yes. And there came a point, late, with the house dark and the window open, and the rain starting again over the river, where he had me under him with his hand spread flat across my chest and his mouth on the gland at the side of my neck. And he stopped, and lifted his head, and looked at me with the last piece of himself he had left. I put my hand in his hair and pulled his mouth back down. The bite is not what people think it is. There is a moment of it that hurts, and then there is something else that arrives, which is another person coming into the room inside your own head and standing there. Everything he had been holding still for months came through it at once. All of it. The 9 days, the arithmetic in the kitchen, the 15 men, the sentence in the long room, and I lay under him with my hands in his hair and took all of it and gave him back the ditch and the fish camp and the mattress and the rice, and both of us said things that neither of us will repeat. I remember, at the end of that night, with my scent and his scent gone into one thing in that room, the tide turning and the water running backward, that he put his mouth against the mark he had made and said something into it. He said my name, my own one, the one that got lost in a state-home file when I was 15. I had said it once, in the fever, on his bed the night Bo brought me out of that ditch, in between the one useful thing I got out and the dark coming down. I had no memory of saying it. He had carried it around ever since and never once used it, because he had worked out on his own that it was not his to use until I handed it over. Here is where we are now. The restaurant is Odette's, and it does well. I work the line there most days of the week. Badly at first, and then not badly. because it turns out that a man who has spent his life being precise with his hands can learn to be precise with them over a flat top, and because Odette is a tyrant. I hold the knife properly now. She fixed that in a week, and she has never asked me why. I did not know. The parish thinks the Omega in Desmond's house is a quiet one who does not say much and should not be leaned on. That suits both of us fine. There is a license behind the register with my own name printed on it. The one that got lost, sitting in a plastic sleeve where the health inspector can see it. Desmond had it done through the broker in Gretna, who owed him, and who is very good with paper. A man who legally never existed, exists now. He is 35 years old. He was born in Missouri, and he is married, which took the old man in Gretna a certain amount of creativity. I do not know how I got into this body. I have stopped needing to. I have a theory, and the theory is not scientific, and it is this. Somebody sold that boy and somebody sold me, to the same man, in the same season, and whatever runs this world did not let both of those go by. Whatever it was, it put me in a kitchen with a family in it, and in a house with a man who eats off my plate first every single morning, and has never once mentioned that he is doing it. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.